Okay, so I'm actually, amid all of this confusion and this barbarism and so forth, I'm so thrilled to be able to have Wesley and to have V on the call. V is a designer, and she will probably be able to tell a little bit about herself as well. And Wesley is a developer advocate. And Wesley joins us all the way from Austin, so it's even more remarkable that you're here amid all of this, postponing because of SWAMMers and so forth. V joins us from Berlin. We haven't actually met in person, but we had a call due to, that was, I think, in pre-corona situation. So if V, you could introduce yourself briefly, and Wesley, you could introduce yourself after V, that would be great. Who are you and why are you here?
So my name is V. It's short for Virginie, but don't worry, like if you say V, I will definitely turn my head and listen to you. So I'm a product designer. I'm living in Berlin, and I've been diagnosed with autism when I was 4 years old. Nevertheless, I grew up into a what I would call very typical environment, because in France, autism is treated as, it's basically something like it's declared coming from the mom, and it is treated in a way of, and I say treated and insist on that, so really like not the neurodiverse approach, by putting kids into centers with other kids with mental disabilities and forcing kids to go through psychotherapy, Freudian psychotherapy. So France is not very a friendly country toward neurodiversity. And the approach of my parents was basically to fight to have me into a normal scholar environment with every other kids, and to just have me being like, I say, normal. And so it has been like, I grew up without this kind of like neurodiverse approach on myself, which we can speak about that later, was very hard. And only something like 10 years ago, actually, I discovered what neurodiversity was, and I learned to live with it. And so this is what I aim to share with people around me, regardless if neurotypical or neurodiverse, just sharing the love. And Aww. Or as you taught me, how do you teach me, like, Korean heart.
Korean heart, yes. Wesley. Oh, you're muted again. Why are you muted? I unmuted you.
It's okay. It's me. I had to sneeze, so I hit the mute button, and it wouldn't allow me to unmute myself. So I think that was part of the issue. So my name's Wesley Faulkner. I'm here in the U.S. Guten Tag. I was diagnosed late in life. Like I said, that like Franziska said, that I'm in tech. I'm in developer relations, and I've been in different roles in tech for all of my life, from anywhere from tech support to hardware installation to now more software and software developer relations. And I wasn't diagnosed until I went to university. I was lucky enough that a friend of mine whose parent was working with people with disabilities recognized the pattern in me. And so that's when I got tested. And I was tested, and it's proven that I have dyslexia. And one of the comorbidities that I have is ADD or ADHD. So I've been struggling with that. So all through life, growing up through school, I've been told that I'm not paying attention, or that I'm a little slow, or also having an older sibling who's neurotypical, going through the same school system, I was compared to her a lot. And so it's like, why can't you be more like her? And so it was only, I think only last year or so is when I decided to go public. And so I haven't been speaking about my neurodiversity or how I cope until recently even. And so I'm also dealing with my own internal stigma and shame, dealing with this label, and finding ways to be able to talk about it both with friends and family as well as my employer.
Wesley, when we talked for the first time, and I don't know if you, it's sort of the background to this call is that Wesley and I had a call a couple of weeks back to talk about what he can contribute. And I vividly remember that you mentioned that there are accommodations that help you thrive in the workplace. So what is an accommodation? What can I understand an accommodation to be?
So our accommodations range. Some of them are tools. So I use a screen reader that helps me. There are also speech to text programs so that I can record or do dictation so that it can put into text for me. But accommodations can span to be almost anything. So requiring that maybe after a meeting that the action items are put down and recorded and due dates are finalized and extremely clear. Instead of saying, have this done as soon as possible, say actually when does it need to be done. So there's some, I think, executive functioning that I need help with personally. So having things as organized and as clear as possible could also be in the realm of accommodations.
Mm-hmm. Actually, since you mentioned that, I've been using the term more and more. And it's become standard vocabulary in some of my talks, which thank you for giving me that insight. I wouldn't have had that otherwise. And thank you so much. When I read your tweet this week, you celebrated that you came out to your colleagues at the workplace and that you shared with them what you are living with. So congratulations. How was that?
Surprisingly easy, actually. I guess it's also because I had the psychological safety to do it, which I know is not given to everybody. So it has been a lot of back and forth since forever, right? Like my parents have always been very transparent about my diagnosis when I was a kid, but always kind of like brush it away of like, well, you're not. But it kind of like always stay in my head, and I always felt not fitting, always feel like and masking is something that I got very good at. And
by the way, is the term masking, is that sort of what you use in language to describe that you sort of try to adhere to the standard that is expected?
Sorry, what?
Masking, is that the term that is being used?
Yeah, it's a term that is very used in the autism community. So I'm using it as well. And yeah, I used to say that I was kind of like playing comedy. Like usually for me it was like, okay, the show is starting at 9, and so many things that you have to kind of like repress. And it kind of became, I would say, a habit, especially like I had the great idea of being into a job where you have to be on the front line. Like being a designer, you have to facilitate so many things, and you're really like under people's eyes, and you have to communicate a lot. So yeah, when speaking with friends, like a lot of them were always like, oh, don't disclose this information, it can be used against you. People will be scared that then they have to give you a pension and this kind of thing. But in the same time, I was kind of feeling that I was lying in a way, or at least not contributing to making my work environment more aware of diversity. And it was only a step to take, and it was a surprisingly hard step. I've been kind of like running experiments with different people about telling them. Some of them I had like the kindest reaction ever, and diversity inclusion is making people come and making people feel that they belong and staying, and I definitely felt like I belonged, and it was such a new feeling, I would say. So it was very heartwarming. On the other hand, there were some people who asked me, like I remember a colleague who asked me, are you sure? And it was so innocent in a way as well to say that. Yeah. But inside of me, like, of course, you have this, boiling amount of questions and reaction because you feel things. And so nevertheless, I felt the psychological safety to do it. And I was very happy. I never thought it would be so easy, and I'm also very happy of all the conversations that went after that, and of people who felt comfortable asking me questions and reaching me out to speak about it. And yeah, so it's funny how a small step then took another step and at another one, and yeah, it was great, and I'm happy as well if I can contribute somehow to bring also more psychological safety for other people. So yeah.
Thank you. Wesley, we mentioned the concept on and described the concept of psychological safety, and I think we also discussed that in tech especially, you do find people who are on the neurodiverse spectrum a bit more. Why do you think that is? Why does tech attract people with neurodiversities?
I would say that this is just my opinion, of course, that in technology, in terms of a word that's used repeatedly in conjunction with technology is innovation. So being able to see things differently and to continuously invent and be different than your peers. It's less of a commodity resource that you just copy and repeat. If you make tissues, you just keep doing that over and over again. You might make a small incremental change, but with technology, you're able to add new features and think of things a different way to attract or even to appeal to a greater range of people. And you're always having to expand that umbrella. I think if you look at the trends of and let's go back to accessibility. When you look at trends of accessibility, when you try to make your product more diverse by making it more accessible, you appeal to a wider audience. And I think bringing people in who are non-neurotypical may also give you an insight and a view that you may not have gotten otherwise, and able to integrate that into your product and make it appeal to even people who are neurotypical. So that's why I think in terms of looking at things different from a different angle, you're able to find problems, find solutions, and even look ahead a few steps and get ahead of competition.
Mm-hmm. If we look at sort of the question, is it better to work in tech having neurodiversity, or is it better not to work in tech? Vi and Wesley, what would you say to that?
I've had my own experience in tech, and not all of it's positive. And I feel that depends on what you're going to be doing and how people-centric the company is. Some people, they want you to be extremely collaborative, which may not be advantageous for a lot of people. Some roles are super individualistic. You throw a task over the wall and then you get the results back, which also, depending on how you work, may not be good. If a company is able to bring in people, understand how they work, understand how to get them integrated with the team, from either of those perspectives of how they work better, and mold the job to the person, then I think that it possibly could be more advantageous in technology. But there are still a lot of hurdles to go through, like the interview. If you are someone who's autistic or Asperger's, you may not look the person in the eye, and the person who is doing the hiring might say, well, they're not really our type. They aren't really, I wasn't able to connect with them and that person. So there are some hurdles to get through, and some stereotypes and some negative thought patterns, especially if you are not relating to the person who's doing the interviewing. Because if you're just looking at checkboxes saying, can they do the job? There is a lot of things that are unsaid that goes through the hiring process that can weed out people who aren't exactly like the people who are already there.
How do you see it, Vi? Is tech a good environment for people?
It's like tech is so wide, and I totally agree with Wesley. Like, a company has to be people centric, otherwise it might create more damage than anything else. And of course it will depend also on the role, on the dynamic inside of the teams. It can be so precise. Like, you have sometimes to zoom in so much, which I totally feel it when I have an interview about the question I'm asking of like, okay, how are we going to be working? And I definitely agree for the fact of like not looking at people in the eyes, which is it's still like very old school HR, you know, this kind of thing of like, oh yeah, you look in the eyes. So them writing, they're, oh, we're not well written, this kind of thing. Just like, what kind of weird rituals is that? I'm glad that over years I managed to look around the eyes of people, like especially this area, and so far I don't think anybody noticed it. It's actually very helpful because you can see when people are on the edge of becoming aggressive. So because usually I don't really catch up the clues of different language variations. So body language is key. Yeah, it can be also very scary sometimes for some companies, and especially in tech, or I would say especially like transforming companies, for example, well, don't have yet this tech education, but still have a huge need in terms of innovation and creativity, is that it can be super scary. It can be like very like, what are we talking about? And are we talking about mental health? And like it's, yeah, it can be very, very scary. But tech, like it's can offer you like things that a lot of company cannot offer you in terms of flexibility, being remote, having asynchronous communication. I think this is really good. Like asynchronous communication is so important. I saw some company like Automatic, who is a company making WordPress.com. They are really good at that. And it's, I mean, when I found about it, I was just like, yes, more of that, please. Also, tech companies are more transparent. And for people who have like a very systemic approach of things and who have a big need of integrity, which is often the case with people with autism, it can be like remove a lot of stress, I would say. And the last but not least as well, the fact that we can dress the way we want when you work in tech. It's like, you know, I've been like, I set my career working for L'Oreal, and you have to wear like all these kind of like very nice clothes, and you're not allowed to have no sleeves, for example, even in summer. And you're just like, okay, but right now I feel like I'm dying, and that this cardigan is so itchy, it's driving me crazy. And sounds ridiculous, but yeah. No, and also one thing is that, yeah, and in tech you can have sometimes your animal working with you as well, which is amazing. Like
why do you think it is that a lot of employers still struggle with supporting people? I mean, I see it from the perspective of being chronically ill, and I'm still sort of on the highly functioning spectrum. And then I see other people that have, let's say, all kinds of disabilities, chronic illnesses. We look at then people on the neurodiverse spectrum who at first glance look, let's say, normal. I hate this word, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And then but there still might be some need to have accommodation, as I mentioned in the beginning. So why do we have companies, and why do we have even whole teams, whole departments that still struggle with supporting people? What is the issue?
A lot of things. Like, first of all, I just saw that Adam posted like it's a non-apparent disability. And
I like the phrasing.
Yeah, it is, yeah, first of all, it's absolutely transparent. Usually if you made it your way to a company, and especially a tech company, first you might not want to speak about it because it's your private life as well, and depending where you are at your life, maybe you don't feel comfortable. And then also, like, well, I think it's a human thing to always be scared of what you don't know. So this is why it's really about, you know, like this idea of really living together. It's like, it's not judging. I found that surprising that one can go through life and never encounter the topic of or living with people who think differently and be curious about it. But maybe it happens, you know, and we have to stay open, because to be honest with you, I want to be done with this kind of situation where people feel like they don't belong. So I want to make the effort of having like an open mind and you know, make the steps that I have to do, so next generation doesn't have this kind of struggle. It's also not easy to pay attention. It will require so much empathy, and just, start having conversation about somebody about like, say, of like, I'm thinking differently, or I'm feeling more intensely. Like, it is so hard. It could invite a lot of people to have to reconsider so many things in their lives. And it can be super scary. And this is why I don't want to leave people alone with like, hey, yeah, I'm neurodiverse, deal with it. But like, okay, how can we make it work? And maybe we cannot. And then I know that will be the one who has to go away. And this is often the case that people who are neurodiverse, if the working environment is not working, they will be the one leaving or being invited to leave. And then, well, why solving it? Nobody is there for saying if we're doing it well or not. So, yeah.
Wesley, when we talked, you actually mentioned a couple of tools. So would you mind sharing with us some maybe apparently simple tools that can help to support?
I'm just gonna, I would like to talk on that, but I would like to tell on what V said about why companies don't change is I think she's absolutely right. It takes a lot of mental load to look at how things are set up and question that. I remember when I went to Ireland from being in the US for so long, and I went across the street and I looked in the wrong direction from where the cars were coming, because I've been taught always look left to right. And so I'm always expecting cars to come from my left. And so I would look left, not see a car, and then look right and the car's coming. And I was like, whoa. And no matter, I knew, but no matter how many times I tried, I was like, and it took a while to break that habit and make it a conscious thing to change, because out of reflex, my body was trained to react that way. And so it took a while to start thinking that this is something I have to actively try to remember and act on it and build up that habit. So I think tech companies are the same in that way, and say they know what's successful, they know what they've been doing all of their lives in terms of living. And so it's hard to think from another person's perspective if you haven't really had to, especially, and you've gotten that far in life. I'll quickly finish that. And so moving on to the tools. So the tools that I use, I try to make it so that I adapt to the neurotypical work state rather than the people in the neurotypical work state having to adapt to me. And that's something that I am gradually trying to ask for, is that people to change to accommodate me as well, because I feel like there are things that I'm really good at, and that if someone offloaded it to me, it would be super easy for me to think something through, or to articulate it, or give a speech. And I would like to work in partnership. So if there's things that I'm bad at that I can work with them, or I don't excel in, I can work with them and maybe offload some of that mental work. So having a board like Trello, where we can keep track of tasks, we can break things up into different pieces, is a really great tool in a workplace that I think everyone can take advantage of, to see if something's falling behind, that as a team that you can either get the reassurances saying, hey, I haven't seen anything on this, and they could say, hey, I have been working on it, and I will make the deadline. It's just my process is I do everything in a flurry. Or they're like, yeah, I'm stuck on this one thing, and you can find how you can help that person move forward. And as I said before, I use a screen reader and some dictation software to help me with processing that. And I use my own board. I have my own Trello where I can keep track of my own things, because I can forget that something has to be done. I just try to have a routine where I look at the board and figure out, oh, I said I was going to do this. I wrote it down. I captured it. And it's like a second brain where I can pull that information up.
We just had a mention in the chat that I asked the question, should neurodiverse people work in tech? I'm sorry if it came across as if I was saying that they shouldn't work in tech. That was not my intention. What I meant to say was, how can we make tech attractive, or how can we create environments in tech so that people of all kinds of backgrounds feel welcome and can thrive. So sorry if that came across from a wrong perspective. Really sorry for that. On the topic, Wesley, of tooling and basically the employer's perspective, how can we as advocates, as allies, as people who are on the neurodiverse spectrum, how can we advocate at the workplace, and what can we do to make, maybe to create a mind change, or to change approaches so that we have this welcoming environment?
I have two answers for that. First is it has to come from the top down to empower people to make change. I've tried to make change in organizations that have not supported me, and it's been a fight. I once tried to get accommodations, and they said, hey, this is a hard place for people who don't have your problem. And so it's like it has to be welcomed in order to have that kind of change. And the second is if it's been demonstrated there's a need of education about this, it's great to be able to be a resource to help, but it's a lot of work to have someone do that work for a neurotypical place. It's like having someone who's colorblind explain the spectrum. I mean, I can tell you what I've heard, I can tell you my experience, but there is a lot that you're going to have to fill in because it's all of the stuff that I've heard about and learned about, and it seems to be true. But, and also I'm just one perspective. And so I'm not an encyclopedia. I can tell you my experience, but there's a difference between my experience and comparing it to your experience and know where those gaps are. I don't intuitively know that. So I think if an employer understands that, hey, we have these type of employees here, which you all do, you just might not know about it, then they should do some of the work to empowering those people, but also not putting all the responsibility on them.
Anything to add to that, Vi?
I so agree with the fact that it has to be a top-down approach. And yeah, if there is one thing that I'm expecting from my manager or from my leadership is definitely like this and topic as diversity inclusion. It has to be top down. Like it's I don't want to use the word fight, but it's a big topic. It's big topic, and I'm clearly like one of the reasons I was stressed to or a bit worried to join today is because I feel like an imposter, because it's a spectrum, because neurodiverse as well. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term. It's also a very new term. I was like, in what can I, be here to answer question? Like actually, like I would love to speak with everybody here today. Like so definitely, and sadly in a way, it's hard to, as a person, like to advocate for it as a single person. One thing that I've been doing though is sometimes dropping this book, Neurotrap, on like a table in the office, and then walking away, and then coming back to pick it up after I saw some people being kind of like, interesting, never thought about it. So then, you just bring another one. And and because the thing is, one thing that I love with mostly people in tech, but not only, but it's the curiosity, something that we have in common. We are curious, we are a bit nosy sometimes, we want to know things, it's like, and if you catch the attention, you get something. And yeah, so this is how I
love that low-key activism. I have to use that for for my work and workplaces and spaces of activity as well, like just sliding. But the thing is, I live with rare chronic illnesses, so there's not a book out there, which is kind of sad. Maybe I have to write one, but I will pick that up. I think that's a great method. When we also spoke, you mentioned, and that was one of the topics when we looked at intersectionalities, right? Neurodiversity intersecting with other things. One of the things that I told you was that I have the impression that there are more men or people who identify as male diagnosed with, for example, being on the autism spectrum, ADHD, and so forth. Why is that?
I really don't know. So I actually read into some of those books that and some articles somewhere as well, that it's come from one of those is social conditioning of what we expect as a behavior from a little boy and as a behavior from a little girl, and the fact that very early we teach girls to be quiet, to adapt, and to also behave. And it took me to become a woman to understand that being taught to behave actually was being taught to mask. And if I take the case of autism in France, usually like autism is rarely diagnosed in girls, mostly because also it doesn't fit with the idea that it's a Oedipian issue. And as I said in the beginning of the panel, in France, until recently, it was considered that if you are autistic, if you are having autism, then you are having a problem with your mom because of Oedipian issues, then you are going through psychoanalysis until you are 18. And, and yeah, regardless if progress or not, of course. Yeah, so that's some of the reason. It seems as well that depending which social class you are part of as well, you will get a different kind of diagnosis or no diagnosis at all. There is also cases of racism for that. So it's, yeah, intersectionality is real when it comes to being diagnosed, and then also when it comes to being empowered as sharing this information.
If there are no more additions, we had one question in the chat. What would be your advice for neurodiverse people who want to enter the tech field?
I'll try to take that one. Mm-hmm. Do a full accounting of your strengths and understand like where you're weak and where you need help. And for the things that are your strengths but require your weakness, find ways to work around that. Either like use tools or get some assistance. There are some places that can help you with those things, or find a network of people that can help you with those things. Or some people use a spouse or a sibling or a parent or a really good friend to say, hey, I'm doing this, but let's give me this time every day or once a week to like help me catch up on the stuff that I'm putting off. You know, there's ways of doing it in your personal life. And if it's a really progressive company, hopefully they will provide that for you. Or you could be extremely transparent and say, hey, I can do this. I really am having a hard time doing that. Will you still hire me? And that is the scariest part of the conversation that even I don't know I could have. So that is an option. That is like an option that I think if you're coming from a place of privilege, you might be able to have. But those are some ways to go about it. Just be extremely transparent, or if when you can't, find your own support system to work around the things that is going to be harder for you to do.
We also had another question, and please, if you have any questions, please share them now so that we can ask our panelists. Wesley, you mentioned that you use a screen reader. Why again do you use it even though you're not blind?
Oh, okay. There's one thing that someone had a comment in another forum, not here. They said, man, I'm doing this training video and I have to watch the video. I'd rather it just be text and I could read a lot faster. That's not the case for me. I read really slow. This is kind of the process for me reading. I see the first letter, see the second letter, I try to sound it out, I hear the sound, then I move on to the next syllable, and then I do the same thing, I go to the next one, and then by the time I finish that second syllable, I may have forgotten the first one. And so then I have to go back and do that, put those two syllables together, and then keep going depending on how many syllables in it. And then I know the word, and then I take the word, and then I process it from an actual sound to a thing in my head, and then I move on to the next word, and then repeat that over again. And then I have to keep doing that until I finish the sentence. And then I have to reflect on it, because I can also remember the first part of the sentence or the second part, but sometimes not both. And then, so reading is extremely slow. So if I have a screen reader, it'll be just the audio part. And so preventing me from changing from symbols to audio or to sounds. The auditory part is easier for me to process than doing the translation into audio and then putting it into my brain. So that's why I use a screen reader, because it goes a lot faster than me doing it.
We also had another question from Shamala. What are your tips for influencing, persuading top-down approach for diversity and inclusion? And that goes to both of you, obviously.
I'll let V take that one first.
Yeah, so I'm not answering to Shyam because she already knows. I mean, she doesn't know, but we can have this conversation at work. So.
I think you should mention that you are colleagues. So
yeah, exactly. We are colleagues. So I think so I think the first thing is be prepared to be kind to yourself. Like, get ready for it. Then make sure that you will have to find allies. So, and it also applies to diversity and inclusion. It's about creating empathy and laying down like, okay, what is in for you if, you know, to do that, like, and making people understand that it is bigger than them and than us. It just makes sense. And it's more like doing nothing will just be like doing the wrong thing. So it's like, it is what it is about, actually. And so it's about that. I know that also a lot of Arbeitgeber, I say, like, company owner, are sensitive to the numbers about percentage of people that they could get. Headcount is a real issue. Like, companies spend hundreds of thousands of euros every year into talent acquisition. And there is a huge pool of people that are totally disregarded or, you know, not well approached because of this ignorance. So there is a huge potential. It's kind of a win-win, but I do hope that it can be this kind of approach that can be driven by the heart and not necessarily by the reason, because we are talking about humans here. But sometimes, in order to kind of nudge and trigger, we have to use reason. Yes, and finding allies and taking the time to educate people. And repetition is key to learning. So patience and patience.
Thank you so much. If there are no other questions for our panelists, I would temporarily close the panel, but how can people reach you after this call to get in touch with you, exchange with you, make sure that they can get all of the info that they need? So how are you available after this?
Twitter is the best way to get in contact with me. That is because it is text, but short, small bits. It's a lot more. It's a lot more available to me. It's easier for me to communicate that way. So Wesley83 on Twitter. Also have a LinkedIn account that if you want to reach for business reasons, if you choose to connect to me that way, I only take connections with people who put a little paragraph about why they want to connect. And so if you just send me a connection, I'm not one of those that just accept everybody. So if you want to actually have a conversation or chat, or just want to see what I'm up to, Twitter's the best place for me.
Awesome. And V, you also had this little bird symbol.
Yeah, I was saying, like, same as Wesley, but I don't have the same Twitter handle, so I cannot say who is the same. Yeah, so I guess my Twitter handle is already like into the tweet of the meetup, but otherwise it's fairly easy. My name is, I hope, Chick-fil, so it's like chick, and fille as girl in French. Yeah, now that I'm saying it out loud, definitely go on the Twitter of the meetup.
Yeah. It will probably,
it was a weird pun.
If you just put in the chat your two handles, and then
yeah, cool.
Follow you. And by the way, that's also kind of how I discovered you two and how we came to be in the meetup together. So the power of Twitter is universal. I just love the fact that tweeting about people who can speak actually led to a lot of interest and having such a great speaker round today. Ian came to us via recommendation from my network. Matthias was a recommendation on Twitter. So 3 out of 4 people came from Twitter. So thank you, Twitter. It's not just about political debates, it's about bringing people together as well. Thank you so much for giving us your insights. I had to speed it through a bit because of the unfortunate incident. I hope you can forgive me for that. And again, I'm so looking forward to exchanging more with you. I think everybody here on the call does. I've seen in the chat that people are teachers and D&I activists and so forth. So this is really amazing getting everyone together.